The gunshot split the Montana air like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds into the evening sky as Fiona Gallagher ducked behind a fallen log, her heart pounding against her ribs. The bounty hunters were still on her trail, 3 days after she'd fled from a marriage that had been nothing short of a prison. Her pale blue dress was torn at the hem, dirt smudged across the fabric that had once been her pride. She clutched the small bundle of belongings closer to her chest and waited, listening to the approaching hoofbeats. She couldn't have gone far, a gruff voice called out. $500 for bringing her back alive, boys. Mr. Sullivan wants his bride returned. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. Sullivan. The name alone made her stomach churn with disgust. Harold Sullivan, 40 years her senior, who'd purchased her hand in marriage from her debt-ridden father. A man who'd looked at her like she was property from the moment they'd met, whose hands had wandered too freely during their brief engagement. She'd fled on their wedding night, stealing his prized mare and riding hard toward the Montana territory, where her cousin had settled years earlier. The voices grew fainter as the hunters moved westward, away from her hiding place. Fiona allowed herself to breathe again. Night was falling and she needed shelter. According to her cousin's letters, the town of Willow Creek was less than a day's ride north. She'd find help there, or at least she prayed she would. As she stood to continue her journey, a sickening realization washed over her. The mare was gone. In her panic to hide from the bounty hunters, she'd failed to secure the horse's reins and the animal had wandered off. Fiona bit back a sob. 22 years old, alone in the wilderness with no horse, limited supplies, and men hunting her like an animal. The tears she'd been holding back for days threatened to spill over. But Fiona Gallagher was nothing if not determined. Setting her jaw, she gathered her belongings and began walking north, following the last fading light on the horizon. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the rolling Montana landscape. Fiona had walked through most of the night, stopping only when the darkness became too thick to navigate safely. She dozed beneath a rocky overhang, one eye open for predators, both animal and human. Her feet ached inside boots that hadn't been made for such a journey, and hunger gnawed at her empty stomach. The sound of running water drew her forward, and she nearly wept with relief when she discovered a clear stream cutting through the landscape. After drinking her fill and washing the grime from her face, Fiona assessed her situation. According to her rough calculations, Willow Creek couldn't be more than a few hours' walk away, provided she kept to the correct path. As she prepared to continue her journey, the distinct sound of approaching hooves made her blood run cold. Had the bounty hunters picked up her trail again? Frantically, she looked for a place to hide, but the open terrain offered little protection. The rider would be upon her in moments. Steeling herself, Fiona picked up a hefty rock from the stream bed. If she was to be captured and returned to Sullivan, she wouldn't go without a fight. The horse that appeared over the rise was a magnificent chestnut stallion, and its rider cut an imposing figure against the morning sky. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a weather-beaten hat pulled low over his eyes and a duster that had seen many miles. A gun belt was strapped to his waist, the holster worn from use. "Madam," he called out, bringing his horse to a stop a respectful distance away. "You look like you could use some help." His voice was deep but gentle, with none of the menace she'd expected. Fiona kept her grip tight on the rock. "I don't need any help," she replied, her voice betraying her exhaustion. "I'm nearly to my destination." The man dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of the Montana sky. "Willow Creek's still a good 10 miles north," he said, keeping his distance as if sensing her fear. "And those boots don't look like they'll carry you much farther." Fiona glanced down at her once fine leather boots, now scuffed and splitting at the seams. "How did you know I was headed to Willow Creek?" A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Not many places else to go around these parts unless you're planning to live with the wolves." Despite her situation, Fiona found herself returning his smile slightly. "I have family there, my cousin and her husband," the man nodded. "The Thompsons, perhaps, or the Hendersons, the Johnsons." Sarah and William Johnson. Recognition flashed in his eyes. Good folks, Will's one of the best blacksmiths in the territory. He took off his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. The name's Matthew Walsh, miss. Fiona, she replied, deliberately omitting her surname. Just Fiona. Matthew Walsh studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, the small bundle of possessions, and the wariness in her eyes. Understanding dawned on his face. You're running from something, he said. It wasn't a question. Fiona lifted her chin. Or someone, he nodded slowly. Happens more than you might think out here. Territories full of people looking for fresh starts. Are you going to turn me in? She asked bluntly. Matthew's eyebrows shot up. Turn you in. Madam, I don't even know what you've done, if anything, and frankly, it's none of my business. There are men looking for me, Fiona admitted. Bounty hunters, they want to take me back to, she swallowed hard, to my husband. Matthew's expression darkened. Husband sent bounty hunters after his own wife. He's not my, Fiona stopped herself. Legally, Harold Sullivan was her husband, even if she'd fled before the marriage could be consummated. It's complicated. It usually is, Matthew said, his tone softer now. He gestured to his horse. Look, Miss Fiona, I've got a small ranch about 3 miles from here. I can give you a hot meal, a place to rest, and then escort you to the Johnsons in Willow Creek, or you can continue on your own. Your choice. Fiona hesitated. Everything her father had ever taught her screamed not to trust a stranger, especially a man she'd met in the wilderness. But exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden, and the thought of food and rest was almost too tempting to resist. Why would you help me? She asked. Matthew shrugged. Because someone helped me once when I needed it, and because no woman should be running scared through these parts alone. He extended his hand toward her, and after a moment's hesitation, Fiona took it. His palm was calloused but warm against her chilled fingers. Thank you, she said softly. Matthew helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. As they rode toward his ranch, Fiona felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she might truly escape the life she'd fled. Matthew Walsh's ranch was modest but well kept, nestled in a small valley with a clear view of the surrounding landscape. A sturdy log cabin sat at its center, with a barn and corral nearby where several horses grazed contentedly. A small garden plot to the side of the cabin boasted rows of vegetables, and chickens pecked freely around the yard. It's not much, Matthew said as he helped Fiona dismount, but it's home. It's beautiful, Fiona replied honestly. The ranch had a peaceful quality that appealed to her after days of fear and flight. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a wooden table and chairs nearby. Books were stacked on a small shelf, a surprising luxury in the territory. A curtain partitioned off what Fiona assumed was Matthew's sleeping area. You can wash up if you'd like, he offered, gesturing to a basin of water. I'll fix us something to eat. While Matthew busied himself preparing a meal, Fiona gratefully washed the dirt from her face and hands. Her reflection in the small mirror above the basin startled her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally vibrant red hair hung in limp tangles around her face. She looked like a woman who had been running for her life, which she supposed she was. Those men who are after you, Matthew said as he set a plate of beans, biscuits, and dried beef before her. How far behind are they? Fiona sank into a chair, the aroma of the simple food making her stomach rumble. A day, maybe less. I lost the horse I was riding, which slowed me down. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. Bounty hunters in these parts tend to be a persistent bunch, especially with $500 at stake. Fiona's head snapped up. How did you know the amount? A faint smile touched Matthew's lips. News travels fast, even out here. There's talk in every saloon from here to Helena about the Boston bride who robbed her wealthy husband and fled west. $500 is enough to get everyone's attention. I didn't rob him, Fiona said hotly. I took nothing but the clothes on my back and the horse which I've now lost. I believe you, Matthew said, his eyes holding her steadily. But $500 buys a lot of belief in the other direction. Fiona's appetite suddenly diminished. I should leave. I'm putting you in danger by being here. Matthew's hand covered hers briefly. Finish your meal first, then we'll figure out what to do. His touch was warm and reassuring, and Fiona found herself nodding. As they ate, Matthew told her about his life in Montana Territory. He'd come west after the war, like many young men, seeking land and opportunity. For 7 years, he'd worked his small ranch, gradually building a modest herd of cattle and a reputation as a fair dealer. Mostly I keep to myself, he admitted. Willow Creek's a friendly enough place, but I've never been one for crowds. Don't you get lonely? Fiona asked, thinking of the isolated ranch with its single occupant. Something flickered across Matthew's face, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. Sometimes, but it's peaceful. After the war, peace was what I needed most. Fiona wanted to ask more which regiment he'd fought with, what battles he'd seen, but the distant sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Matthew was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the silent grace of a man accustomed to danger. 3 riders, he reported, his voice tight. Coming fast, fear gripped Fiona's heart. The bounty hunters. Likely, Matthew agreed. He turned to her, decision already made in his eyes. There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. Hide there until I come for you. I can't ask you to lie for me, Fiona protested. You didn't ask, Matthew replied simply. He moved a rug aside and lifted a trapdoor, revealing a small storage space below. Go on now, and Fiona, he hesitated. Trust me. With the riders almost upon them, Fiona had no choice. She descended into the cool darkness of the cellar, and Matthew lowered the door above her, replacing the rug. Through the floorboards, she could hear his boots crossing to the cabin door and the creak of hinges as he opened it. Afternoon, gentlemen, Matthew's voice carried clearly to her hiding place. What brings you to my property? Looking for a runaway, a gruff voice replied. Red-haired woman, early 20s. Stolen property of Harold Sullivan of Boston. Seen anyone matching that description? Can't say that I have, Matthew answered evenly. Not many women pass through these parts alone. Mind if we have a look around? $500 is waiting for whoever finds her. There was a pause, and Fiona held her breath. I mind very much, Matthew replied, his tone hardening. This is private property. Unless you've got a warrant from a territorial judge, you'll respect that. Listen here, cowboy. The voice grew threatening. We don't need warrants out here. We're authorized by Mr. Sullivan himself to retrieve his property. A woman isn't property, Matthew's voice was cold now. And in Montana Territory, a man's land is his own. I suggest you move along. They said she was a runaway, one of the men persisted. Might have come this way. Then she ran straight to me, Matthew replied, and Fiona could hear the smile in his voice, though she knew it wouldn't reach his eyes. And I'd be protecting her, not turning her over to the likes of you. The tension in the air was palpable even through the floorboards. Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs as she strained to hear what was happening above. You making this personal, Walsh? The bounty hunter asked. Just stating facts, Matthew replied calmly. Now, unless you want to find out how the territorial marshal feels about harassment and trespassing, I suggest you gentlemen continue your search elsewhere. There was a long pause, followed by muttered curses. This isn't over, the bounty hunter warned. Sullivan wants his wife back, and he's not a man who takes disappointment well. Neither am I, Matthew replied. The sound of retreating hoofbeats finally broke the tension, but Fiona remained frozen in her hiding place. After what felt like an eternity, the trapdoor lifted and Matthew's face appeared above her. They're gone, he said, extending his hand to help her up. For now, Fiona climbed out of the cellar on shaky legs. You lied for me. You could have gotten the reward. Matthew's expression was serious as he regarded her. I meant what I said. No woman is property to be claimed or returned like a lost cow. They'll be back, Fiona said, wringing her hands, and next time they might bring more men. Probably, Matthew agreed. Which is why we need to get you to Willow Creek as soon as possible. Your cousin and her husband can offer you protection while we sort this out legally. Legally, Fiona gave a bitter laugh. The law says I belong to Harold Sullivan. We were married in a church with witnesses and documents. The fact that I was coerced doesn't matter. Matthew's brow furrowed. Coerced, Fiona sank into a chair, suddenly too weary to stand. The full story spilled from her lips: her father's gambling debts, Sullivan's offer to clear them in exchange for her hand, the hasty wedding arranged before she could fully comprehend what was happening. "I was to be his third wife," she finished quietly. "The first died in childbirth. The second—" She swallowed hard. "The second fell down a flight of stairs, at least that's the official story." Matthew's expression had darkened progressively throughout her tale. "So you ran on your wedding night before?" "Yes," Fiona confirmed. "I couldn't bear the thought of—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Matthew paced the small cabin, thinking, "There's a judge in Helena who owes me a favor. If we can get you there, explain the circumstances, a favor won't override the law," Fiona interrupted. "And Sullivan has money, influence. He'll claim I'm mentally unbalanced, that I need to be returned to his care for my own good." "Then we'll go further," Matthew said decisively. "Idaho Territory, or maybe Oregon, somewhere Sullivan's influence doesn't reach." Fiona stared at him, confusion evident in her expression. "We." Matthew stopped pacing and met her gaze directly. "I'm not turning you over to those men, Fiona, and I'm not letting you face this alone." "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Something shifted in Matthew's blue eyes, a decision being made, a boundary crossed. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and determined. I know you'd rather face the wilderness alone than submit to a life you didn't choose. That tells me all I need to know about your character." Fiona felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. For the first time in days, perhaps even years, someone was seeing her, truly seeing her, not as property or a solution to debt or a pretty face, but as a person with worth and will of her own. "Thank you," she said softly. Matthew nodded once, then resumed his practical planning. "We'll leave for Willow Creek at first light. Your cousin's place will be safer than here, and we can figure out our next move from there." That night, despite her exhaustion, Fiona slept fitfully on the small cot Matthew had prepared for her near the fire. He had insisted on taking a bedroll outside, both for propriety's sake and to keep watch for the bounty hunter's return. In the darkest hours before dawn, Fiona was jolted awake by the distinct smell of smoke. Not the comforting scent of the hearth fire, which had burned down to embers, but the acrid odor of something larger burning. She scrambled to her feet just as Matthew burst through the door. "The barn's on fire," he said grimly. "Those bastards came back." Fiona rushed to the window. The night sky was illuminated by flames engulfing the small barn. The horses in the corral neighed in panic, pushing against the fence rails. "We need to free the horses," Matthew said, already moving toward the door. "And then we need to ride. They'll be waiting for us to come out." "It's a trap," Fiona realized, her blood running cold. "Yes," Matthew agreed, "but we can't stay here. The cabin will be next." Working together, they gathered the few belongings they could carry: food, water, Matthew's rifle and ammunition, a few items of clothing. Then, keeping to the shadows as much as possible, they made their way toward the corral. Matthew had just reached the gate when a shot rang out, splintering the wood beside his head. He ducked, pulling Fiona down with him. "There," he whispered, pointing to a figure silhouetted against the burning barn. One of the bounty hunters lying in wait. "We're pinned down," Fiona whispered back. "What do we do?" Matthew's face was set with determination in the flickering firelight. "I'll draw their fire. When they focus on me, you free the horses and take Bandit, the chestnut stallion. He's the fastest. Ride hard for Willow Creek." "No." Fiona gripped his arm. "I won't leave you here to die for me." Matthew's hand covered hers briefly. "I don't plan on dying today." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "I just found something worth fighting for." Before she could protest further, he was moving, keeping low as he worked his way around the corral. Fiona watched in terror as he deliberately exposed himself for a moment, drawing a shot from one of the bounty hunters. "Come on, Walsh," a voice called out. "Hand over the woman, and we'll call it square." Matthew's answer was a carefully aimed shot that kicked up dirt near the speaker's feet, sending him scrambling for cover. The distraction worked. All attention was now on Matthew as he ducked behind a water trough. Seizing her opportunity, Fiona dashed to the corral gate and threw it open. The frightened horses needed no encouragement to flee the fire and gunshots, stampeding out into the night, all except Bandit, who seemed to be looking for his master. "Here, boy," Fiona called softly, approaching the stallion with her hand extended. To her relief, the horse allowed her to take his reins. With a strength born of desperation, she pulled herself onto his back and turned him toward the spot where Matthew was exchanging fire with the bounty hunters. "Matthew," she called. "Come on." He glanced up, surprise evident on his face when he saw her mounted and waiting rather than fleeing as instructed. Without hesitation, he fired one more shot to keep the hunters at bay, then sprinted toward her. With practiced ease, he swung up behind her on Bandit's back. "You were supposed to ride for Willow Creek," he said in her ear as they galloped away from the burning barn. "And you were supposed to have sense enough not to face 3 armed men alone," she retorted. His laughter rumbled against her back, unexpected in the midst of danger. "Fair point, Miss Gallagher." They rode hard through the night, taking advantage of Matthew's knowledge of the terrain to lose their pursuers in the rugged landscape. By dawn, they had covered considerable distance, but Bandit needed rest, and so did they. In a secluded grove of cottonwoods near a small creek, they finally stopped. Matthew helped Fiona dismount, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. The contact sent an unexpected thrill through her despite their precarious situation. "We should reach Willow Creek by midday," Matthew said, leading Bandit to the creek to drink. Fiona sank onto a fallen log, the events of the night catching up with her. "Your ranch, I'm so sorry." "They destroyed it because of me." Matthew shrugged, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Buildings can be rebuilt, land endures. Still, it was your home." "Home is more than walls and a roof," he said quietly, coming to sit beside her. "I learned that during the war, watching towns and farms burn across Virginia and Tennessee." Fiona studied his profile in the soft morning light. There was a story there, hidden behind those blue eyes. "Which side?" she asked gently. "Union," he replied. "Joined up in '63 after Gettysburg. Thought I was fighting for something noble." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Found out war isn't noble no matter which side you're on." "Is that why you came west, to leave it behind?" Matthew nodded. "Seemed like a good place for new beginnings, fewer ghosts." Fiona understood that sentiment all too well. "And now you've lost your new beginning because of me." His gaze met hers, unexpectedly intense. "Or found another one." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Fiona looked away first, her cheeks warm despite the morning chill. "We should keep moving," she said. "The bounty hunters won't give up easily." They reached Willow Creek just after noon, the small mining town bustling with activity despite its remote location. The Johnson homestead sat at the edge of town, a modest house with a blacksmith's forge attached to one side. Sarah Johnson's reunion with her cousin was tearful and joyous. A petite woman with the same red hair as Fiona, Sarah welcomed them both with open arms, while her husband William, a bear of a man with a booming voice and gentle hands, immediately offered them sanctuary. "Sullivan's bounty hunters have already passed through town," William informed them as they sat around the kitchen table. "Asking questions, flashing money. Most folks here mind their own business, but $500 is mighty tempting to some." "We can't stay long," Matthew said. "We're putting you both at risk just by being here." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze Fiona's hand. "Family doesn't turn away family. You'll stay as long as needed." "Sullivan's reach is long," Fiona said worriedly. "He has connections throughout the territories." William nodded thoughtfully. "That may be, but the law out here isn't quite what it is back east. A woman forced into marriage under duress might find sympathetic ears in the territorial court." "You think we could contest the marriage?" Matthew asked, leaning forward eagerly. "It's possible," William allowed. "Judge Parker over in Fort Smith has ruled in favor of women in similar situations before. He's a fair man, believes in the letter of the law but also in its spirit." Hope bloomed in Fiona's chest for the first time since her flight from Boston. "How far is Fort Smith?" 10 days hard ride," William replied. "And you'd need to avoid the main trails where Sullivan's men might be watching." Matthew's expression turned thoughtful. "I know these territories well enough to navigate the back country if we had fresh horses, supplies." "You'd have me with you too," William declared. I'm not sending my cousin-in-law and a lone cowboy to face the wilderness and bounty hunters without help. No, Sarah protested. William, you can't leave the forge for so long. Who would see to the horses, the mining equipment? The blacksmith's shoulders slumped slightly, acknowledging the practicality of his wife's concern. Then I'll arrange for an escort. There's a wagon train heading south in 2 days, safety in numbers. As the Johnsons discussed logistics, Fiona noticed Matthew had grown quiet, his gaze distant. When the conversation finally lulled, he cleared his throat. Before we make any plans, he said carefully, there's something I need to tell you, Fiona. He hesitated, clearly struggling with his words. I haven't been entirely truthful with you. Fear gripped Fiona's heart. Had she misplaced her trust again? What do you mean? Matthew ran a hand through his dark hair, a nervous gesture she hadn't seen from him before. I knew who you were before we met by the creek. I'd been tracking you, or rather, tracking the bounty hunters who were tracking you. You were hunting me, Fiona whispered, feeling sick. No, Matthew said firmly. I was hunting them. Those particular bounty hunters have a reputation for bringing back their quarry in less than ideal condition. When I heard they were after a woman, I couldn't stand by. So you were what? Planning to rescue me? Fiona asked, confusion evident in her voice. Something like that, Matthew admitted, though I didn't have much of a plan beyond keeping you out of their hands. William was watching Matthew with newfound respect. You risked your life for a stranger. Matthew's eyes never left Fiona's face. It was the right thing to do. In that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of the connection that had been building since their first meeting. Fiona saw in Matthew's eyes not just kindness or attraction, but something more profound. A man whose moral compass pointed true, who acted on his convictions regardless of the cost to himself. Thank you for telling me, she said softly, for being honest. The tension in Matthew's shoulders eased slightly. There's more. I know Harold Sullivan, or at least I know of him. During the war, he made a fortune selling faulty equipment to the Union Army, boots that fell apart after one march, blankets that unraveled, rations that made men sick. Hundreds died because of his greed. William whistled low. That's a serious accusation. One that was buried after the war, Matthew continued. Sullivan had friends in high places, paid off the right people, but there are still those of us who remember, who know the truth. Fiona stared at him, pieces falling into place. That's why you helped me, not just because I was in danger, but because of who I was running from. At first, yes, Matthew admitted. When I heard Sullivan's name, I wanted to thwart him any way I could, but then. He paused, color rising in his cheeks. Then I met you, and my reasons changed. The days that followed were a flurry of preparation. William arranged for Fiona and Matthew to join a wagon train heading south toward Arkansas Territory, where Fort Smith and Judge Parker awaited. The Johnsons provided fresh horses, supplies, and most precious of all, documentation that might help Fiona's case. A letter from Sarah testifying to her cousin's situation and character. Through it all, Fiona found herself drawing closer to Matthew. They spoke late into the nights, sharing stories of their lives before their paths had crossed. She told him of her childhood in Boston, of her dreams to teach school before her father's debts had stolen her future. Matthew shared more about his war experiences, the nightmares that still sometimes woke him, and his hope for peace in the Western Territories. On the eve of their departure, as they sat on the Johnsons' porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant golds and pinks, Matthew's hand found hers. Whatever happens in Fort Smith, he said quietly, I want you to know that meeting you has changed me, for the better. Fiona's heart skipped a beat. How so? Matthew's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. For years after the war, I was just existing, building my ranch, working my land, but not really living. Then you appeared, running for your life but never giving up, and I remembered what it felt like to fight for something that matters. Fiona turned to face him fully, struck by the raw emotion in his voice. Matthew, before she could continue, shouts erupted from the direction of town. William burst through the front door, his expression grim. Sullivan's men, he reported tersely. A dozen of them just rode in. Someone must have sent word we're harboring you. Fiona's momentary happiness shattered. We need to leave. Now. The wagon train doesn't depart until morning, Sarah said worriedly, appearing behind her husband. We can't wait, Matthew decided, already on his feet. We'll have to make our own way. William nodded grimly. Take the back trail through Harper's Gorge. It's rough going, but we'll put you a day ahead of any pursuit. Within minutes, they had gathered their belongings and provisions. As William saddled their horses, Sarah pressed a small packet into Fiona's hands. Letters, documents, she explained quickly. And this. She added a small Derringer pistol. It was my mother's, just in case. The cousins embraced tearfully. I'll write when we reach Fort Smith, Fiona promised. You'd better, Sarah replied, wiping her eyes. And when this is all over, come home to us, both of you. The significance of her words wasn't lost on Fiona. Home. Both of them. As if they were already a pair, a unit, a future together assumed, they rode out under cover of darkness, taking the treacherous back trail William had suggested. For 3 days, they pushed hard, stopping only when absolutely necessary for the horses' sake. Matthew's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as they navigated ravines, crossed rivers, and traversed mountain passes. On the 4th night, camped in a sheltered hollow, Fiona finally voiced the question that had been on her mind since their hasty departure. What happens if Judge Parker rules against me? If he says the marriage is valid? Matthew, busy tending the small fire he'd built, looked up at her. Then we keep riding. California maybe, or up to Canada, somewhere Sullivan can't reach. Fiona asked, her voice small. You'd leave everything behind for me. Matthew set aside the stick he'd been using to stir the flames and moved to sit beside her. Fiona, I've already left everything behind. My ranch is ashes. My cattle are scattered. All I have left is right here. He took her hand in his. And to be honest, it feels like more than I've had in a long time. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. I don't want you to regret this. To resent me later for the life you lost. The only regret I'd have, Matthew said softly, is if I let you face this alone when every instinct tells me to stay by your side. In the flickering firelight, with danger still pursuing them and an uncertain future ahead, Fiona Gallagher made a decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to Matthew's. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But when Matthew's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, it transformed into something deeper, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both breathless, Fiona rested her forehead against his. I think I'm falling in love with you, Matthew Walsh. Is that crazy after such a short time? Matthew smiled, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight above. If it is, then we're both crazy. Because I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you standing by that creek, ready to defend yourself with nothing but a rock and sheer determination. They reached Fort Smith on the 9th day of their journey, weary but hopeful. The frontier town was larger than Willow Creek, with a proper courthouse and the formidable presence of Judge Isaac Parker, known throughout the territories as the hanging judge for his strict adherence to the law. It took 3 days to secure an audience with the judge, during which time Matthew and Fiona remained vigilant, always watching for Sullivan's men. When they were finally ushered into Judge Parker's chambers, Fiona's hands trembled despite her determination to appear composed. Judge Parker was a severe-looking man with keen eyes that seemed to pierce through pretense. He listened without interruption as Fiona presented her case: the coercion, her father's debts, Sullivan's reputation and history. You have evidence to support these claims, Miss Gallagher? He asked when she had finished. Matthew stepped forward, producing the documents they had gathered. Sarah's testimony, statements from 2 of Sullivan's former employees about his business practices, and most damning of all records Matthew had obtained during the war about the faulty equipment scandal. Judge Parker reviewed everything carefully, his expression revealing nothing. Finally, he set the papers aside and looked directly at Fiona. The law regarding marriage is clear, Miss Gallagher. A ceremony performed with witnesses, documented by church and state, is legally binding. Fiona's heart sank, but the judge continued. However, the law also recognizes that contracts entered under duress or through fraud are invalid. Hope flickered in Fiona's chest. Your Honor, I find sufficient evidence to suggest that your consent to this marriage was obtained through coercion, and under circumstances that no reasonable person would consider fair or just. Judge Parker's stern face softened slightly. Furthermore, the allegations against Mr. Sullivan regarding war profiteering, while not directly relevant to your marriage, speak to a pattern of behavior that this court cannot ignore. With a decisive nod, he picked up his pen and signed the document before him. I am declaring your marriage null and void, Miss Gallagher. You are, in the eyes of this court and the law, a free woman. Tears of relief sprang to Fiona's eyes. Thank you, Your Honor, thank you. Outside the courthouse, in the bright Arkansas sunshine, Matthew lifted Fiona into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with the pure joy of freedom. It's over, Fiona said wonderingly. I'm free. Matthew set her down but kept his arms around her waist. What will you do now, Fiona Gallagher? The world is open to you. She looked up at him, this man who had risked everything to help a stranger who had become so much more to her in such a short time. I was thinking of heading back to Montana Territory, she said. I hear there's good land there. A place where someone might build a new life, maybe even a school for the children of settlers and miners. Matthew's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I hear Montana's a fine place for new beginnings, though I should warn you, building a ranch from scratch is hard work. I'm not afraid of hard work, Fiona replied, her own smile matching his. Especially if I have the right partner. Partner, Matthew repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that, though I was thinking of a different title eventually if you're amenable. Fiona's heart soared with happiness and possibility. I'm amenable to discussing all sorts of titles, Mr. Walsh. We have plenty of time now. As they walked arm in arm through the streets of Fort Smith, planning their return journey to Montana and the life they would build together, Fiona remembered the words that had first drawn them together. They said she was a runaway, and Matthew's answering smile, then she ran straight to me. Sometimes, Fiona thought, running away was really running toward something better, toward freedom, toward hope, toward love. She had fled in fear but found courage. She had lost a forced marriage but gained a chance at true partnership. And in Matthew Walsh, she had found not just a protector or a savior, but an equal someone who saw her strength as well as her vulnerability, who valued her mind as well as her heart. Together, they would build something new on the ashes of what they had left behind. And that, Fiona knew with absolute certainty, was worth all the risk and hardship they had endured. 3 years later, the Walsh Ranch stood proudly in the same valley where Matthew's original homestead had been. A new cabin, larger and sturdier than the first, overlooked fields where cattle grazed contentedly. A small schoolhouse had been erected at the edge of the property, where Fiona taught the children of neighboring ranchers and the growing community of Willow Creek. And on the front porch, rocking gently in the evening breeze, Matthew Walsh held their 6-month-old daughter, Elizabeth Sarah Walsh, while his wife of 2 years read aloud from one of their favorite books. They had faced challenges, of course, harsh winters, drought, the occasional rustler. But they had faced them together, building a life richer than either had imagined possible that day by the creek when a runaway bride and a solitary cowboy had found in each other the home they'd both been seeking.